Did you know that between 1854 and 1929, over 250,000 children were put on trains and sent across America, not knowing where they were going or who they would end up with? This is the story of the orphan train movement, one of the most ambitious and controversial social experiments in American history. A story of hope, heartbreak, and a chapter of our past that many have tried to forget. Imagine the streets of New York City in the mid-19th century. Industrialization is booming, and so is immigration. The city is overflowing with people seeking a better life, but for many, the reality is grim. Poverty, disease, and desperation are rampant, and caught in the middle of it all are the children. Tens of thousands of them were homeless, orphaned, or abandoned, living on the streets, surviving by any means necessary. They were called street Arabs, a derogatory term that stripped them of their humanity. Enter a young minister named Charles Loring Brace. Horrified by what he saw, Brace believed that these children weren't inherently bad, but were products of their environment. He had a radical idea. What if you could take these children out of the poverty of the city and place them in the wholesome, moral environment of rural, Christian farm families? He believed the fresh air, hard work, and family values of the countryside could save them. In 1853, he founded the Children's Aid Society, and the orphan train movement was born. The process was both organized and chaotic. Agents from the society would round up children from the streets and overcrowded orphanages. Some were true orphans, but many were half-orphans with one living parent who simply could unafford to care for them. Others were given up under the false promise that it was a temporary foster arrangement, a kind of boarding school in the country. The children were scrubbed clean, given new clothes, and packed onto trains heading west, with a sign pinned to their coats that read, "Children to be given away." Can you imagine being one of those children? Crowded onto a train, clutching a small bundle of belongings, watching the city you know disappear behind you. The journey itself could last for days or even weeks. The older children were tasked with looking after the younger ones. They didn't know their destination, only that they were heading toward a new, unknown life. For many, it was the first time they had ever left the city, the first time they'd seen vast open fields and endless sky. It must have been both terrifying and exhilarating. When the train arrived in a small Midwestern town, the real ordeal began. The children would be lined up on a stage in a local church or opera house, much like a market auction. Farmers, townspeople, and their families would come to inspect them. They'd check their teeth, feel their muscles to see if they were strong enough for farm labor, and ask them questions. It was a humiliating and frightening experience. Children were often poked and prodded, their worth measured by their potential for work. Siblings who had clung to each other for survival were cruelly separated, often forever, as families only wanted one child, or a boy instead of a girl. The outcomes for these children were a lottery of fate. For some, it was a dream come true. They were welcomed into loving families who treated them as their own. They received an education, learned a trade, and grew up to have successful lives, becoming governors, judges, and doctors. These were the success stories that Charles Loring Brace and the Children's Aid Society championed. They saw themselves as saviors, rescuing children from a life of destitution and crime. But for every happy ending, there was a story of heartbreak and exploitation. Many children were not seen as sons or daughters, but as indentured servants, a source of cheap farm labor. They worked from sunup to sundown, were poorly fed, barely clothed, and denied an education. Abuse, physical, emotional, and mental, was tragically common. These children were outsiders, trained children, often looked down upon by the local community. They were trapped with no one to turn to and nowhere to run. The agents from the Children's Aid Society were supposed to conduct annual checkups, but with so many children spread across such a vast area, follow-up was inconsistent at best. Many children simply fell through the cracks. As the years went by, the orphan train movement started to face criticism. States began passing laws that made it more difficult to place children from out of state. The rise of modern social work and the idea of preserving the family unit rather than breaking it apart gained traction. People began to question the morality of separating children from their families and heritage and shipping them off to be inspected like livestock. Finally, in 1929, as the Great Depression began to strain the resources of even rural families, the last official orphan train made its final journey. For decades, the story of the orphan train riders was largely forgotten, a hidden chapter in American history. Many of the riders were ashamed of their past and never spoke of it. They carried the secret of being a train child their entire lives, feeling a sense of abandonment and a longing for the families they lost. They didn't know their birth names, their birthdays, or where they came from. It wasn't until the latter half of the 20th century that the riders, now elderly, began to connect with one another and share their stories. Organizations like the Orphan Train Heritage Society of America were formed, creating a community for survivors and their descendants. They held reunions, established museums, and worked tirelessly to preserve the memory of this complex legacy. Through their efforts, we can now understand the full scope of the orphan train movement, its good intentions, its flawed methods, and its profound impact on hundreds of thousands of lives. The story of the orphan trains is not just a piece of history. It's a powerful lesson about the complexities of child welfare, the meaning of family, and the enduring human need for identity and belonging. It reminds us that good intentions can sometimes lead to unintended and devastating consequences. It's a story of resilience, of children who survived against all odds and built new lives from the fragments of their past. By remembering their journey, we honor their struggle and ensure that this chapter of American history is never forgotten again. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think about the orphan train movement? Was it a noble rescue mission or a tragic mistake? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as compelling as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten history. See you next time.